dive deeper into instilling staff confidence, which will include facility documentation, facility modification suggestions, as well as what you can employ now. And finally, we will discuss the potential effects of the office design in the future, followed by question and answer. So why are we here? This webinar will focus on facility modification suggestions for office environments. Yesterday, we had a little bit of a change up to what we are experiencing in Wisconsin. And we had initially thought that timing today would be great for adjusting some of your office environments as the work order was welcoming back people on May 26th. So given yesterday's news, we'll probably have a little bit more hastened approach to what we're going to do with our office space. If you've seen the Wisconsin guidance on preparing workplaces for COVID that was issued by Governor Evers' staff last Friday, much of what you saw was having to do with staff and what you can do with staff and how the adjustments for those staff. But few words were included regarding what modifications you should make to your facility. So what we'll do during this conversation is really give you some guidance and some strategies to do that. Being facility experts for this presentation, we took an approach of gathering as much data as we could find, infusing some of our own rationale and combining it into one presentation. This session easily could have been 3 to 4 hours with all the recommendations produced by dozens of companies publishing their recommendations. Our goal for this presentation was to choose strategies that are of high impact and that could be accomplished in relatively quick order. Hoffman's belief is that these are no longer changing or uncertain times. To us, this is a new normal. We're living in the new normal. We view much of what we've experienced since March 25th, yes, 51 days ago, when the safer at home order was issued, largely the way we will conduct our daily routines for the foreseeable future. The way the U.S. has chaotically, sporadically, and inconsistently responded to the outbreak has many people questioning how we would have responded had we been prepared. And now that we're seeing many countries that have recently relaxed shelter-in-place orders, now shifting back into lockdown due to spikes in coronavirus infections, we see that we can imagine that this may happen also in the U.S. Therefore, our opinion of the building codes, as well as federal, state, county, and local guidance guidelines from agencies will reflect this situation, and we may be adjusting our situation as well for preparedness as future pandemic events occur. So, references. We wanted to call to the attention the references that we collected for this webinar and this presentation. You see on your screen ASHRAE, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, as well as BOMA, Building Owners and Managers Association, the CDC, Cushman and Wakefield, Department of Health Services, the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration through OSHA. Gensler is where we've pulled a few things as well as, and finally the International Facility Management Association, better known as IFMA. So we've coalesced a lot of what's been published by those firms as just a quick note. So moving into the next section of our first section of our presentation, a quick refresher pertaining to the good staff hygiene practices. And we'll review these fairly quickly. So first of all, as everyone or most people have heard, keeping the spacing of 6 feet or more between people, masks for staff closer than 6 feet, keeping restrooms well stocked and antiviral cleaning supplies on hand, providing hands-free dispensers and sanitizers in lobbies, conference room, and lounges. We get into some of the specifics as to the sanitizers that you should be providing. The typical is to provide at least 60 to 95% alcohol content within those. In the next slide, we talk about the actual cleaning, which is very important for how we're going to act in the future. So next slide. Keeping the office clean. What we're hearing and recommending is that it does happen before and after work, but also 3 times throughout the workday. And what that means is wiping all surfaces and door hardware. Make sure your employees' workstations are orderly and clear of clutter each day so that the cleaning staff can sanitize efficiently. Basically, a practice to describe to staff is at the end of each of their work days, they should leave their desk as though they weren't coming back. Also, empty all trash and recycling containers daily. Keeping restrooms well stocked, touchless soap and faucets and antiviral cleaning supplies should be in abundance as well. The next slide, we start talking a little bit about Legionnaire's disease. And basically, this is a pneumonia that is caused by Legionella bacteria within the water piping system. It's rare, but in the case of buildings sitting empty, like many of yours might be, for extended periods of time, the possibility of contracting this disease is there. So the remedy to this is to run water, all building supply water, for 30 minutes minimum. At this point, we will turn it over to Aaron to focus on indoor air quality. Aaron.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Hopefully traffic wasn't too bad for anybody. So much of what we're talking about and what we're hearing in the news, very much of it has to do with our air quality, which sort of thrusts the idea of our HVAC systems and our own indoor air quality in our buildings to the spotlight. One of the big keys here is the air filtration systems. So we can start to incorporate the HEPA principles in our HEPA filters, and HEPA is essentially measured on a MERV system, and MERV 16 being the highest, meaning the higher your MERV value, the more particulates are being filtered through your air system. Some other technologies that are out there already, but maybe not used in the widespread manner that they will be in the future, given recent events, would be carbon filters. Carbon filters are another level of air filtration and cleaning that we can take on. It essentially deals with activated carbon filters, which takes charcoal treated with oxygen, and it makes the carbon more absorbent, opens up the pores inside, which then collects removes VOCs and odors and other microbes from the air. And then we go into light purification or air purification, which is another level still. And again, having been in the news several times, but also having been used in the industry, just not necessarily in a lot of commercial instances, more so in the medical field, would be the UV light. So we hear about UV being integrated into our air handler systems and used to kill the germs. And we've known for over 100 years that UV light kills germs, and it's been used in hospitals to purify operating rooms and so forth, other medical facilities, water sterilization, germicidal lamps in the food industry and so forth. But now I think we're going to start to see this being used in a more widespread arena. The other arm of UV light was actually something brought to us recently, in the news recently, from Columbia Center of Radiological Research. They've been experimenting with something called far UVC light, which essentially, if you remember the key number here of 222 nanometers, that's the frequency needed to kill the particulates and the virus in the air. And a lot of us grew up learning that we shouldn't be standing under UV lights and so forth, but really with that frequency, it's not enough to penetrate our skin and damage our cells, but it will, within minutes, according to the researchers, kill off the bacteria that's in the air. So these are going to be instituted, I think, and it's a great resource, and there's a lot of information already out there. As one case study, the New York subway system is going to start using this to clean their trains in the evening. So it's a real thing, it's happening, and it goes without saying to check with your HVAC providers and to keep abreast of all the new information that's going on out there. Finally, we have plasma lighting or plasma filtration. And essentially this creates it's a bioclimate rich atmosphere of positive and negative ions that effectively will neutralize bacteria, virus cells, gases, aerosols, VOCs, to name a few. So again, it's new technology, but there are companies and professionals in the industry starting to institute this. So ask a lot of questions when you're going back to your spaces and when you're dealing with reopening, and you want to institute some of these new technologies. Slide number 10 is our next slide. Talking about air purification, we're familiar with green technology, green environments. The idea of biophilic design takes it to another level, essentially creating a man-made biosphere within your space. It goes beyond putting a plant on your desk, essentially, but we can use Amazon spheres, as depicted here in the image, as an example. Really bringing in the incorporation of greenery, oxygen-rich environment, oxygen-producing greenery, daylighting, and just really setting the scene for an outdoor environment being brought inside. To kind of sum it up, the idea of biophilic design, a quote from Metropolis magazine, if design doesn't focus on aspects of the natural world that contribute to human health and productivity in the age-old struggle to be fit and survive, it's not biophilic. So really bringing us to the outdoors, but within our indoor environment. Obviously there are going to be levels of this that you can incorporate into your office, but it's definitely something that will help produce or help reflect on employee morale, introducing more daylight and overall office experience. Getting into our next topic of instilling staff confidence. So there are a lot of quick and easier fixes that we can take on as we move back in. Technology that's out there, some that's out there that maybe you don't readily know about, but you can, again, check with your design professionals and keep up to date on the recent news. But touchless, touch-free, hands-free receptacles, call buttons that operate at the wave of your hand, and automated window shades that function based on the amount of light or automatically, this sort of thing. Again, just really reducing those surfaces that we're going to be touching to help keep that clean environment in our office. And so, next slide. More of the modifications we can start to look at. With current codes on accessibility to make sure that these things meet the needs for our egress for those for everyone in the office. And but there's a lot of good technology out there already. Okay. One of the concepts that's been in the news too, and it's used in the medical industry. Medical facilities would be an isolation room. So this may be something that we start to see being incorporated more in a post-pandemic world in, let's say, a standard office setting. So you'll want to check with what your federal and state regulations are calling for in a room such as this. But it's really the concept of recognizing that there's an issue and where do you put the individual, how to make them comfortable, but how to make everyone else feel comfortable in the office, and what is the procedure. So you put a process in place for addressing these types of situations. Make sure you have the appropriate signage, the personal protective equipment, and then how to sanitize the environment afterward. And with that, I hand it back to Steve.
Thanks, Aaron. Still in the keeping the thought here of instilling staff confidence is moving beyond the modifications to the facility, but really how you communicate with your staff. The common rule here is to communicate early and often. I don't think we can over communicate in this situation, especially as we start looking at bringing people back to the office. So some of the things that we'll want, or you may want to consider, is how you communicate, the different methods in which you do that. PowerPoint instructions is something that people have done. Videos is another one that we've seen that, again, illustrate and start to educate and train people as to how to really use the facility once they come back, because things will undoubtedly change. Emails, newsletter, intranet, internet, all of the used to communicate this, the changing information should have the ability to be referenced later. By and large, once someone sees it, they'll probably want to review it at a later point. So thus the point of making sure that's recordable is referenceable in the future. Next slide is to prepare and educate the staff. So part of what you may want to such as door hardware, access and egress points that may have changed. Again, going at what Aaron was talking about earlier, you'll want to consult your code, your building official, your code expert, to really talk about, maybe limiting some of the access and egress points so that you're not sanitizing more than you need to. But in the same token, there are access and egress points that are required by code. You'll want to understand which ones those are by seeking professional advice or your building inspector. Introduce the special cleaning procedures that you've incorporated. Fogging, while you don't want to necessarily do that while staff is present, is one of the things that people have been doing. Certainly the airlines have been doing it, and I think it's common knowledge that the cartridges that are used within the fogging apparatus are typically something that are a little bit harder to come by, just like masks these days. So you'll want to investigate the entire fogging process if you employ that strategy. As Aaron was earlier referencing, the ultraviolet light purifiers that you may integrate into your existing HVAC system is something that you probably also want to incorporate in any communication to give staff that confidence that you're doing what you can to keep their environment clean. Standalone air purifiers in rooms is also something that we've seen. And also sprays that could be intended to disinfect and sanitize is something that you may want to also communicate with your staff to instill that confidence. What you also want to do is post your cleaning precautions and procedures in prominent, visible locations. So if there is a limitation of access to the office, you'll want to make that known to everyone. Ensuring that code required access and egress points are maintained is something you also want to communicate to the staff. In the slide that you have on your screen, also instilling staff confidence, we've done it here at Hoffman, but we've enacted or included infrared thermometers and logging the results. So what you see on your screen in the backdrop is just a portion of what we've done to log staff temperature as they enter the office. The reason we did this is CDC and Wisconsin State Health Department is recommending this as a guideline. Basically, as you take the staff's temperature, use a thermal scan thermometer with a hand sanitizer always nearby. This is one of the more common ways to detect whether staff has the virus through fever, and is the one test that can be done with all employees. Temperature screening log, again, those are asked. One of them references whether they've traveled outside the area within the past 14 days, if they've come in contact with anyone as family member or otherwise within the past 14 days, whether they have a fever greater than 100.4, or symptoms of lower respiratory illness, such as cough, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, and so forth within the past 14 days. And lastly, if they are currently experiencing a fever that's greater than 100.4, or the symptoms that I mentioned earlier. Basically then, those results are entered into the log sheet and kept on file. Future emergency protocols and reaction, that is the reason that we're taking those temperatures, is to make sure that we track what it is that is happening. As I mentioned earlier, you want to post within the office areas that, there we go, areas that have been cleaned. And as we talked about previously, before and after the workday is complete and has started, as well as 3 times throughout the day. And what we've seen people do, and what we have as maybe a strategy, is to post those areas that have been cleaned as being that. Again, this is going in the thought of instilling staff confidence. It's going to be a psychological transition for people as they've been largely working from home to really get them back in the office. So understanding and conveying that that you are taking care of them through the sanitizing of the office, and then subsequently letting them know through the signage that you see on the screen, is really paramount to, again, contributing to that staff confidence. Next slide, we talk about conference rooms. As many of you have heard, social spacing, we like to refer to as, rather than the distancing thing. I have trouble saying that word, distancing. But social spacing is really trying to maintain that 6 foot of distance. So maybe consider every other seat within the conference room, as well as no more than 10 in a room. So you see some quick links or quick facts over on the right. Something to keep in mind as you get back to the office and you start educating the staff on how to utilize the office. A couple of things to keep in mind is that conference rooms are occupied 36% of the time by one person. So again, trying to understand how to utilize the conference rooms, who should be in them, how many should be in them. Some of these facts are something to keep in mind as you move forward. 85% of the meetings have fewer than 7 attendees, again, contributing to the fact that you don't want more than 10 in each conference room. And 2 to 4 people, 6% of the meetings have 10 or more attendees. So again, very small numbers that have that number of people in the room. So should be a little easier to try to maintain social spacing as we move ahead in the conference room use. Next, we'll talk, let's see, next slide. So again, instilling staff confidence. And now we're going to talk about a little bit more about staff considerations and the potential to do shift work and or a staggered start end time for your staff. So back when Governor Evers announced the Badger Bounce Back Plan and the recommendations for it, he was quoted as saying, it should be like turning a dial, not flipping a switch, meaning don't bring people back too fast or at one time. So basically, as we look at the way people have been working at home, we're going to try to transition them into the situation that they were in a couple of months ago. But 2 months ago, they were working in the office, and now they've been working typically largely at home. So we need to be sensitive to the employees as the new / existing work life comes back into their life. There's obviously a dynamic flow that's happening within this. So what we've seen is typically people may take their floor plan and or a diagram that illustrates where people were sitting previously. You probably want to take that and understand how social spacing and the potential of using every other workstation might be utilized rather than every station as it was before. The things you want to keep in mind, though, is that you might some of us have looked at the way you might return as maybe a phase one, up to 20% of the people. You want to probably take out the people in that phase one approach that may be vulnerable. They may have immune deficiencies and other medical conditions. And largely, as we've seen, the people over the age of 60 probably should not be in that first phase as well. Some of those medical conditions that are especially susceptible are people with cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, chronic respiratory disease, and cancer. Those people should probably not be in your phase one. And as you move forward, suggested into phase two, potentially get up to about 75% of the people. Again, though, we recommend that you would not include those vulnerable staff due to health conditions and or age. The last phase, obviously, is to bring everyone back. Moving beyond that, next slide. So, social spacing. We talked a little bit about this at the outset, but the 6-foot rule still applies, obviously. You as far as modifications to your facility, you want to look at corridors and cubicle density and try to de-densify both. I think that's a word, I'm not sure. Provide directional signage and maintain distance. When you talk about collaboration type spaces, you'll likely not be utilizing those spaces the way they were intended. So in the short term, you might want to take a look at either not using those spaces or using them in a manner that will create the space and the spacing that you're looking for. We're going to get into the outdoor space, and I'm going to turn it over to Aaron to describe that a little further.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so in the spirit of de-densification of our office spaces, we're going to be returning, and we're used to being apart now. So the thinking out there is that this is going to be the norm in our daily routine. The idea of physical fitness at work, promoting physical activity, fresh air, taking a break for that sort of thing, and utilizing available outdoor spaces for potential workspace isn't new. I think this just what's happening now in our world maybe puts a greater focus on that for us to really think about our environments and how can we bring more of that into our world. We know that the sun is good for us. We know that that improves morale, which in turn improves productivity. And so we go outside and maybe there's a patio, maybe there's an office deck, maybe it's a walk at lunch. But I think the goal is to take those opportunities when possible. And from what you read out there, I don't think the benefits would be minimal on your staff. And so bringing the idea of the outdoors in the sense that we're now becoming a more active society as a goal is turning out to be the way we're going. So in our next slide, we start to go into the potential effects to office design. as a lead in there. Here are just some things that we know now. And again, it's changing daily. It's growing, it's shrinking, it's new info. But in recent studies, 62% of Americans are currently working from home. I've heard higher, I've heard a little lower, but that's a good average number. We're starting to learn that they not only do they prefer it, but their productivity is going up from being at home. There's a study by Interior Design Magazine that said 25 to 30% will never even return to the office. That the results had yielded such great productivity, as well as a very positive work-life balance, that they will stay remote, and that's a reality that we're facing. So it's going to keep increasing as we go here, and in turn, we're learning how to use technology to help facilitate that. So in our next slide, we get into some of these office impacts. So we design our world and our environments, and how is working from home and then returning to a different environment going to happen? Well, obviously working remote using virtual technology, we have to have the right infrastructure. We have to have, you need to make sure you've got a good place to work, set up a nice quiet area, something that's comfortable. Work on timing, your office environment will dictate that depending on your situation, but work with your owners and your staff and really have something that works for everybody. Because as we know, we're learning now, we go home and we've got different challenges throughout our day that we weren't expecting, but we still have to get things done and keep moving forward. There should be the spotlight on well-being, as I was just talking about, bringing in that natural daylight. And, to quote a recent study by Future Workplace and View Dynamic Glass, over 50% of workforce agrees that natural light and view of the outdoors is the most important office perk, ranking higher than fitness center, childcare, medical care, and on-site cafeterias. So this was a survey of over 1,600 employees, and there are many other studies out there with natural daylight and green environments that really speak volumes to the importance of our connection to the outdoor world. Other means through a mechanical sense to bring that environment in would be operable windows, trying to reintroduce that into our work environments. And of course, virtual fitness centers, an emphasis on that physical activity. You've probably seen commercials or things online with companies like Mirror or Echelon. It's a giant iPhone that hangs on your wall, but it allows you to run a fitness program, Peloton, these sorts of things. You can turn a small office room into a gymnasium with some of this new technology. So something to think about as we move forward. And so our next slide. Signage. Signage is another big part of what's going to happen, I think. So right now we're seeing what we're predicting to be temporary signage, but sometimes temporary things have a way of becoming permanent. We're seeing it all over. We're seeing directional corridors in the stores. We're having new things placed in front of our faces every day. I think as designers, we have an opportunity here to take what we can from this, and where there's opportunity to integrate this into our design through increased need for the signage. I think we can integrate it into design in tasteful ways, and it's just another design challenge and opportunity for us, but it could be an exciting one. And it might just be a necessary one, so it's something we need to think about. In our next slide. We've been working as planners and designers and design thinkers for quite some time now to open up our spaces, to have free address type moving around in collaboration in our office spaces. So we need to really look now, and our challenge is what is this post-pandemic world going to mean for how we function in our daily lives in the offices? Cubicle wall height is one. Do we go back to the cubicle jungles? Do we bring those things to the ceiling? Is it really about that, or do we start to use things like Steve talked about, the phasing of staff and alternating days working from home as our new barriers rather than physically changing? I'm being somewhat rhetorical, but these are the challenges we'll face as designers going forward. Our collaboration spaces, we were free range creatures of habit in some of these new office environments, but now we are sort of forced to think about how we collaborate, how many people are collaborating with us, and so forth. So having virtual meetings again, incorporating technology, and then potentially the open fresh air settings to help facilitate that as well. It's going to be on the forefront of the decisions we make every day very soon. So in our next slide. One big aspect of going through a project is, and going through your spaces as we think about being clean, being safe, the material selections we make in a new building, or what, taking a look at what we currently have. So there are upholsteries out there that are used in the medical industry and in senior care and so forth, that really lend themselves to, a better environment in terms of being cleanable, being, antibacterial and these sorts of things. And there are a lot of products out there. So you need to talk to your interior designers, your architects, consultants out there that will help you kind of navigate through the labyrinth of opportunities and available products out there. But they do exist. Surfaces and cleaning those surfaces. Steve spoke a lot about a rigorous cleaning protocol. Well, one of those choices you need to make when your materials is, how long do certain viruses live on these materials? And we've got a little chart to the right on the screen here. For example, on stainless steel, they're predicting that the coronavirus can live up to 5 days in some instances. So really think about that when you're putting in your cleaning practices and moving forward with your material choices. And so our next slide. Quite obviously, the building codes are going to, shift and ebb and flow with what's going on, and they're going to help us drive all these new ideas forward, and then we'll learn from that and put those into practice. Some of the big touch points would be the HVAC systems, and ASHRAE is going to be right up there with thinking us through this, I guess, for lack of a better description. Their position, so ASHRAE being the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, they're primed and ready to tackle the challenges that we're facing as we go into this post-pandemic environment. They've enacted a group of industry leaders and experts that are engaging in this epidemic task force. And basically the task force has a focus of looking at the relationship between the spread of disease and HVAC in our buildings. Again, the HVAC being the lungs of our building, and so much of what we do to prevent bacteria spread is going to begin there. So ASHRAE is definitely a great resource, and you can visit their website for that, which we can provide. But, talk to your local HVAC provider too as you're going through this and navigating into the future. And they can help keep you current with what's going on in the industry and what's new. And given experience recently in one of the projects we're working on, I spoke with ours, and they're already looking into it. So the info is out there. Just ask questions. ASHRAE will be concentrating on building ventilation requirements, reducing the airborne concentration of the coronavirus, for example, through the mechanical system filtration. And they're also going to be looking at unconditioned spaces and overall preparedness for future epidemics. So definitely a great resource. Other areas of code that are going to be potentially undoubtedly affected would be access, directional egress, numbers of egress, things like that, how we're passing each other. Does that affect the corridor width? What kind of door hardware do we use? Now we're using hand wave technology. Are we using hands-free pull and things like that? Occupancy limits could be another one. How much square footage per person are we requiring? Does that change now because of these new 6-foot rules and 10-person limits on meetings and things like that? So definitely keep in touch with the International Code Council on what's current. Ask your design professionals, and they'll help steer you through it. It's a lot of information. And so Here's Barbara again, and she's going to recap what we've gone through.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve and Aaron, for all of the information. Again, this is very technical stuff, material, sometimes dry, but very important and very informative. And we hope they were able to walk away with some things that you can implement right away. Just a few main takeaways as we go through this. It's really just maintaining a clean office environment, how you can instill confidence in your staff and have them come back, perhaps in a phased plan or shifting and staggering work times and days, things like that. We talked about things and use of materials, how things that you can easily implement right away, or some that require more modifications. So hopefully there were some little nuggets in there that you're able to take away as well. Again, most important, communicate with your staff and tell them early and often what's going on, just so then you can instill that confidence once they return back to work. And we know for sure that office design and codes will change. It's just a matter, the question is what? So our final thoughts to you before we open up the Q&A is, we think it's safe to say that the debate will go on for some time before a standard is supported, whether the office will take a more open feel or we create hard walls to privatize offices again. What will that next pandemic bring, and how will we morph that into a more pandemic-proof operation? Or was working from home the best alternative of all? While pandemic reactions may not rule in the end, what we do know is that we've learned that we were not ready, and the office environment, we need to adapt, pivot, and be better prepared for the next pandemic. So with that, I'm going to open up some questions. It looks like we did receive a few questions during the presentation. So there was one question, Aaron, to you, was in regards to the UV lighting, when you were talking about, I believe it was when you were talking about the subways. The question was, what was the wavelength for that UV lighting?
22 nanometers.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
222 nanometers.
222 nanometers?
Correct.
Okay.
222. Yep.
222. There you go. That's the answer to that one. Another question is, when you speak about phasing in staff, what is the time frame that constitutes a phase?
Well, that is kind of it's a judgment call based on several things, but I think it's, I've heard 30 days, I've heard 45 days. So I would say it's somewhere in between there, but it really goes back to how clean and sanitized your facility is, what your staff's reaction to that is in the first phase, and let that be your guide for the next phase.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Another question again about the UV lighting system. Do you know what the general cost of a UV lighting system would be?
I don't offhand. I know it's going to be higher right now due to the fact that it's new in terms of bringing it into our commercial industry on a regular basis. But like anything else, I think if we start seeing it more and more, and as more companies pop up to produce it and make it available, hopefully that drives the cost down a little bit. But I think if you want to add too that there's, again, every day I'm finding new information. This is kind of a new area for me to really dig into, and I'm finding so much that, to the point that even Philips Lighting is offering sort of recessed down lighting that you can just pop in. You switch out a light bulb, and you've got some of the UV technology right there. So it's coming down to a level that we can all relate to and hopefully have at our fingertips soon.
If I could, the one thing to keep in mind is these heating, ventilating, and air conditioning HVAC systems. Many buildings are different. Some include boilers, some don't. Some include radiant and not much for air handling. So when you talk about air handling systems, many of them are different. They're different sizes, tons of cooling and heating as well. So definitely what Aaron said earlier, you definitely want to talk with your mechanical contractor, whoever is maintaining your building.
Awesome, thanks so much. It looks like There is one question. If we're going to offer these types of services for assessments or an installation of these various types of hardware options. And I think the answer would be yes, we would be more than happy to have a conversation with anyone about any of the topics that we spoke about.
Absolutely.
And have both
Definitely.
a lot of time researching for this presentation. Oh, there's another question that popped up too. If there was a positive COVID-19 case in
Barbara frozen? Looks like she's frozen.
Oh, no. Am I back?
There she is. You're back.
Technology, working from home. Okay. So the question is, if there was a positive COVID case in an office environment, what would be the recommendation for the HVAC system?
Well, first of all, if I could start, you'd want to remove the person, get them into that isolation room, and remove them from the facility as soon as possible. We have talked about, similar to isolation rooms in other types of facilities, where that's a separate HVAC system within that room itself. If it were me and that room is available on site, I would try to get a different HVAC system in there so that the return system of the HVAC won't direct that air into the rest of the facility, first of all. Secondly, I think the removal, after you've removed that person, I think getting at your question, Barbara, is looking at the strategies to potentially change that air handling system so that you can, we talked about purification. So filtering doesn't kill the virus. Purification does. The plasma and the UV systems does kill the coronavirus. So I would look more into those strategies over how to kill the virus.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so then there was a question about previous cancer. You had mentioned previous cancers as a health concern. I think you were talking about vulnerable staff.
Correct.
The question is, do you think all cancers fall into this concern?
I think until we know more about how the virus can affect all of the medical conditions that I mentioned earlier, I think it's best that we do look at cancer as a uniform treatment until we learn more. And right now, information is changing by the day.
Every day.
By the minute.
Every day. By the minute. By the second, right? And then there was a follow-up question to your HVAC question here. It says that they understand the answer in relationship to an isolation room, but what about the rest of the building and the occupancy by people that particular day?
She froze again. Can you repeat the last part?
Sure. What about the rest of the building and the occupancy of the people that specific day?
I think what I heard is, what can we do with the balance of the facility? And how do we prevent the spread of it? So while filtration can slow it, if there is someone that has the virus and was subsequently removed, what is happening with the balance of the workforce that is still in that environment? And again, I would go back to making sure at that point, if it were me, I would remove everyone from the office until you get your HVAC systems in a situation where the UV or plasma strategies can be deployed for an appreciable amount of time. Aaron, anything to add to that?
That's a good point, Stephen. I think where I'm thinking is that a lot of what we just covered happens in concert with. It's important not just for coronavirus, but for so many other things to have a good cleaning policy. It starts there. If our surfaces are dirty and infected with something, you're going to transmit regardless of what it is, regardless of what the different lifespans on different surfaces and things. It's out there. So you have to clean. That's a first bullet point right there. And, the HVAC system should be looked at as a preventative. You start early and make sure that you've got things in place before something happens, because if you need to change your HVAC system, it's not instant. So all of these things kind of working together will help keep your office clean. And that's why we put it all out there. Some Some have a greater cost, some have a greater time frame to put into place. But like Steve said, if something happens, list of your own preparedness protocol, and start to work in those things like phasing employees or alternating staff schedules and things. So yeah, good question.
Well, and Aaron brings up a point. It's not just coronavirus that is an airborne contaminant. We've got the flu that typically, I mean, we kind of overlook that, but that's a huge one that still provide or contributes to many deaths throughout the world. So really maintaining your filtration is a big one, but then going that next step to remove those viruses, those contaminants is a huge thing.
Yeah, on a personal level, in January, I went through a procedure, and at that time, a common cold could have killed me. And now, I feel like the bionic man. I'm improved, I'm better, and I'm out there. But these things are still a worry to an extent. But it isn't just coronavirus. So knowing that an office is putting these things into place really will give certain members of your staff, if not all of them, the confidence that I think they're looking for. So
I think that's the most important thing, is to have instilling that confidence back after we return back to the office.
There she goes, freezing again. Sorry everyone about that.
Okay. Can you guys hear me now?
So I think in the spirit of this, if there weren't any other questions, I'll go through the closing remarks here basically. But again, we'd like to thank Optima, the Fox Cities Chamber, Heart of the Valley Chamber, De Pere Chamber, New North for promoting the event. Hopefully you were able to use some of these facility strategies as you begin to bring your staff back. We'd like to thank everyone for your time and attention, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Be safe and good luck.
Am I still frozen?
No.
Am I back now?
Completely thought out.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. A copy of this presentation and the PowerPoint will be available to all those who registered. So thank you again for your time. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Aaron. Lots of informative information, and hopefully everyone's able to walk away with something. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.